All right. Sorry for the delay, guys, but I'm glad we're back up. I was actually concerned there for a minute, but I don't want to waste any more of your time. So we'll go through this. If you've got questions throughout, please let's just keep it informal. If you guys have a question, let's pause and get to it, and let's get underway here. So something that I want to talk about initially, and I know a lot of us are interested in, what obviously what's going to happen over the next few months. We've heard things about La Nina happening or whatever. But here's one of the reasons why I don't think this La Nina episode is going to go away anytime soon. And it has everything to do with how the PDO, or the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, has been stacked over the past couple of years, and especially over the past year or so. And you can see really from all the way back in May of 2020, the Pacific Ocean has been in a cold or a negative state. And that usually fuels more frequent and longer lasting La Nina episodes. And that's exactly what we've had with this one, because going forward, unless something unforeseen happens, we will be dealing with essentially year 3 of La Nina-like conditions around here. And until this changes, until the Pacific warms up some, there are going to be areas that are dealing with drought right now that are going to struggle. Now, does that mean that it's not going to rain in those areas? No, that is not what that means. I mean, we've seen the rain in southwest Kansas here in the past week or so that's actually helped to benefit things. We've had rain recently across parts of Texas as well. We've had rain in other parts, but it simply stacks the deck against us to completely rid drought in those areas that have been struggling now for a while. And this is the sea surface temperature anomalies all the way back into February. And you can see down there in the central and eastern Pacific Ocean, all that blue. And what that blue has done nothing but expand in the past couple of months. We weakened it in January and February, and it came back gangbusters during March and April. The other thing that's been happening is cooler than average water extends from the Gulf of Alaska down the west coast of the United States, off the Baja, and that's that negative or that cold PDO that I'm talking about. And again, until that warms up, we can't really reverse this process. And until that warms up, we can't necessarily beat back this La Nina episode. No, is it going to get stronger over the summer? I highly doubt that, simply because that's just not what La Nina episodes do. They tend to max out from fall through the winter and then gradually weaken in the spring. Now, as I said, we started to weaken it a little bit in January, February, but in the present state, I just don't see it weakening going forward, at least in the near term. So it's kind of a what you see is what you get type of a thing, unfortunately. And in fact, this particular graph right here shows the probabilities that we're going to be in La Nina over the next several months. We have April, May, June on the left, where we've got it 100%. And over here on the right, we've got December, January, February, where we're still at about 50 to 60% probability of dealing with a La Nina episode. So none of the model information that I'm looking at says it's going to go away, and none of the historics, looking at the way the ocean is stacked, would suggest that it's has the shot of going away either. So, can things always happen? Absolutely. But when you're looking at it from a scientific standpoint and looking at all the forensics that we have to kind of analyze it to see if there's a shot at that happening, probably not. The past 60 days, what you're looking at are precipitation anomalies. So areas that are green and blue have been wetter than average. Areas that are obviously brown and red have been drier than average. And you can see really, if you took a line and went along I-35 from KC to Wichita to Oak City, southward to Dallas and eastward, you've been doing all right. But you go just to the west of that line, and it goes from okay to terrible in a pretty short period of time. And again, that's because of the way the oceans have been stacked, perpetuating this pattern. The same thing could be said in the northern portion of the northern plains up across eastern Montana and North Dakota. They're in horrendous shape right now because of their spring wheat planting is so far behind because of how wet they got, during the month of April, while areas farther south were struggling mightily across Colorado, southwest Kansas, down into New Mexico and West Texas. It's been very problematic. In those areas, I don't see a whole lot of change taking place, at least as of right now, i.e. the farther southwest you go, the worse shape and the more this drought is going to give you problems if going forward over the next several weeks or so. So with that in mind, it still continues the thought that I've been talking about for a long time. The farther east you get, the better shape you're going to be in. However, I do see at least a little bit of hope on the horizon, at least some help for some areas. And this is what computer model forecast precipitation anomaly looks like over the next 15 days. Now, if you're looking down across Southeast Texas, even into North Central Texas and points eastward, you might say that looks fairly wet. Yeah, it looks fairly wet compared to where they've been. Absolutely. What's causing that? There's likely going to be some tropical moisture come northward out of the Gulf of Mexico that will likely fuel some rounds of thunderstorms that'll help folks out in those areas. But the farther northwest you go, you run out of that pretty quickly. Again, you see dry anomalies across Nebraska, South Dakota, and farther west out across western Colorado, Utah, Idaho, Montana, in those areas. So again, it's the same premise. The farther east and southeast you go, the better off you're going to be. In central portions of Colorado, I'm going to be dealing with snow in my backyard this weekend. In some cases, quite a bit of snow on the grass, the trees, and whatnot. It's going to give the trees a real beating. So the weather is still somewhat active, but if you are not in those active areas, it continues to be a real problem. In terms of the temperature anomaly over the next 10 days or so, that's kind of what you're looking at. So generally cooler than average, central and north, warmer than average the farther south and southeast you go. In terms of overall temperature over the next 10 days or so. So that really hasn't changed a great deal either. And we've been seeing some pretty serious heat across most of Texas and across the southern plains. The GFS precipitation anomaly over the next 35 days looks very similar to that as well. But it has changed recently. And what has changed is it's been weakening the dry signal across the midsection of the United States and across the Four Corners area as well. So again, even in those areas that are drier than average, are you still going to be seeing precipitation? Yes, you are. But it's got a little different take the farther east you go, where the precipitation is just much more plentiful and obviously much more, there's much more longevity to it over the period. But that's again what it looks like over the next 35 days or so. The Euro precipitation anomalies over the next 45 days also shows some of that relief. Where the dry anomaly is not as stout as it was across Texas and Oklahoma. It's still pretty bad. Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota. And then if you go westward across Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, Utah, and even into California, we're going to start to dry out by quite a bit. But again, the real big drought footprint that's been going on has been anchoring itself across the Four Corners states and across the western high plains. And some of that is going to start to weaken a little bit. Is it enough to make a huge difference? In places it might be. But remember, in order to eradicate this, we have to get it over a longer period of time. And historically speaking, when we keep this La Nina around during the back part of summer and go into fall, we go right back to where what we've been dealing with. And that's what worries me the most, that even when some areas might have a little bit of relief here and there, we go right back to the same old pattern. And this is kind of what the June, July, August looks like forecast. This just came out a few days ago. I sent this out to clients a few days ago as well. Sometimes even as late as last night, I got this out too, because I was analyzing it for quite a while. But this is the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. June, July, August precipitation forecast. You can see where all the brown is across West Texas, New Mexico, up through the Plain States. The areas farther west, I still think Arizona sees a good monsoon season. I still think parts of New Mexico see a good monsoon season, maybe up into Southeast California, Southern Nevada, Southern Utah. But I think that's where the core of the monsoon anchors itself, the farther southwest you go. And I'll show you why here in just a second. But that's what the forecast looks like right there for June, July, and August in terms of precipitation anomalies. We can also look at the Euro seasonal model and see what it was spitting out. And it's largely going to have a similar take. So you see Arizona looking wetter than average, New Mexico, at least the southern half, looking wetter than average, but then you go just to the north and northeast of there, and overall, June, July, August looks drier than average. Interesting that central Texas is in the white right there and along the Gulf Coast. I think that might actually owe to the model picking up on the possibility of increased hurricane activity. With the La Nina way it is right now, I would expect a very active Atlantic hurricane season and possibly even the Gulf of Mexico. And that's really kind of the wild card to some of those areas in Texas that I usually don't like to bank on. I never like to bank on tropical activity as a big relief, because those storms, they could be out there in the ocean and it can be active as hell, but if nothing hits land, it doesn't matter. So over the long haul, I do think that the monsoon season will get ramped up pretty healthily from northern Mexico into those areas of the Southwest. For if you have interest in those areas, and I know some of you actually do. In terms of history with this, okay, and looking at some of these models in their longer term forecast, here's another one for June, July, August, and you can see that it has dry anomalies there, parts West Texas, Northeast New Mexico, Colorado, and then the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, which I think is probably spot on, where the middle part and latter part of their fire year out there is going to be pretty rough. But notice western parts of New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, southwest Colorado, they're in the white right there. That indicates at least average precipitation, which during the monsoon season is pretty significant in terms of that. And then this particular model obviously shows north central Texas and points to the east being in the white shaded areas too, and somewhat being average. So there is at least a little bit of hope right there. The models are one thing, okay? So if you look at the models and take them at face value, it's pretty tough to do because some of those models are biased in one particular way. Some of them are very quick to jump on this, that, or the other thing. So what I've done is look back through history and do some analoging for these years in the past that are stacked the way we have it right now. So those years right there from 88, 99, 02, 06, 12, and 13, June through August, for those years, these are what the precipitation anomalies looked like, where it was very dry across the midsection of the country, including the Corn Belt during those years, as well as up across Wyoming, southeast Montana, parts of Texas, Colorado, Kansas. But look who wasn't dry: Arizona, New Mexico. And the monsoon season for those years was very robust. And you look over at Florida. Florida was wet too. I think that also owes to the increasing chances of hurricane activity or tropical moisture hitting those places too. So I'm not saying this is what our June, July, August is going to do, but history offers a pretty good take into something that we should at least be concerned about or worried about or have optimism about with the monsoon season in Arizona and parts of New Mexico. Interestingly enough, if you look at the temperatures for those same years from June through August, this is what you got. It was very warm in the north tier. The southern tier of the country was average, which I know Texas, June, July, August is pretty hot. But the core of the hottest, driest weather for those years appeared to be anchored across the midsection, the Missouri Valley, the western Corn Belt, parts of the northern plains. So that's what we have right now to go on for these next few months. I didn't take you beyond August on purpose because I would like to see how things settle this summer and see how much the La Nina episode gets beaten back because the models right now have it fairly strong and long lasting. And while I think that'll still be the case, you know what? If for whatever reason we get some pretty good moisture in places that are dry right now, well, that soil moisture will help alleviate that drought and help to break down that pattern over the long term. So I'd like to let the situation sit just a little bit here before we look and see what fall and winter looks like. I kind of have it in my mind about what I think fall and winter will look like with traditional La Nina. And if you're interested in that, we can talk about that. But for the time being, this is kind of how I see the summer months stacking up right now. So with that in mind, if you guys have questions, please feel free to fire away.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so do any of you have some questions you'd like to ask Brian, or go ahead, don't be shy.
And is this helpful? Do you want to see something else? I'm always looking for your guys' feedback too.
I got a quick question I want to ask you, Brian, because as we've kind of led up to this point, you've alluded to the fact that kind of there's that spring months where it's kind of hard to lock down what's going to happen moving into the summer, right?
The spring predictability barrier. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, we are on the back side of that.
Right.
So I would expect the model information that we're getting is a lot better than what we were getting in March.
Okay, great.
Um, and and to be honest with you, there hasn't been a whole lot of wiggle room with what those models have been advertising since March with La Nina happening. So that's another reason why I think the deck is pretty much stacked the way it is right now, and it's probably going to remain that way for a while because usually La Nina, if it was going to hang around, it would at least be weaker than it is right now. And the strength that it is remained at is not necessarily unprecedented because I hate that word because it got used so many times and overused during COVID. But it is a little unusual to see it at this strength going into summer. Coming out of summer and strengthening, sure. But it's a little unusual to see that trend right now. So that kind of gives me at least a little bit more credence to the forecast of it continuing and at least being somewhat of an issue for us during the back part of this year as well as the early part of 23. Anything else from you guys?
I'm reading the chat right here. Trey's got one. I don't know if it's a question or here we go. So it says the last two winters have been dry and warm in eastern Montana and western North Dakota. Do you expect the same this winter for those areas?
To be honest, that is kind of counterintuitive to how La Nina is actually supposed to behave. So it is tough to say, especially since we flipped the switch in eastern Montana and across the Dakotas once we got into late March and especially April, where they've had so much moisture up there recently. That's what you would expect during a traditional La Nina episode to be during the winter months. So would it be unusual for them to have a third consecutive La Nina deal with the dry winter up there? Yes, it would. And I think if they are droughty and continue to be drier than average up there during the summer and into the early part of fall, that would give me concern for that to be the third year that they would have dryness up there. If we can beat back the drought enough up there to kind of balance the pattern out a little bit, put some moisture in the ground, and then we have this La Nina episode that continues, through fall and into winter of 23. I would be a whole lot less concerned about it being dry up there, if that makes sense.
Becky's asking. She said she didn't see a lot of the Pacific Northwest in some of those maps. Mm-hmm. She's just we were kind of was that because those first maps were kind of focused on the Great Plains and Rocky Mountain region. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is, and I can bring some of those if you want me to go back and we can look at some of that. We certainly can on a wider view if you prefer.
Becky, is that something you'd like to see? Yeah, she says please.
Let me fix that here just for a second, okay? If you guys, I'll get some maps pulled up here for you guys. Well, I'm doing that. If you guys have other questions you want to address, just please feel free to fire away. So I'll pop back in here. Okay, can you guys see that now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so this is the Euro model for the next 45 days. Okay, and you can see what it's printing out there, where the Pacific Northwest has been obviously a lot wetter than average, over the past several weeks. So I would expect them to dry out in those areas from Northern California and points northward. You see some of those dry anomalies also get pretty robust across Western Montana and up into Idaho as well. So I don't foresee that to be a continuation up there in terms of the moisture that they've been seeing in the Pacific Northwest. And also, if you want to look at another model here, we can look at the GFS extended range for the next 35 days, and you get the same thing. you get a drier than average field here across really most of California, northward through Oregon, western Washington, parts of Nevada, Idaho, Utah, and whatnot, kind of favoring that drier than average stuff. And the models have, to be honest, have really been on that area to be drier than average for this upcoming summer. A lot of the models have been hinting at that, and the shorter range models, and by shorter range, I mean, here in the next month or so, have been on board with that as well. So I think the tip toward that, at least all the evidence points toward that being kind of a thing.
Does that help, Becky? Is there anything else you kind of wanted to address, or?
You could also look at the Euro seasonal here. And this would be for June, July, August. That's what it looks like for that area to, Northern California, Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies also has a tip toward, obviously toward drier than average. But again, if you look farther south, you see the evidence in the monsoon impacting Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Southwest Colorado and Utah.
So as far as the rest of May, you would anticipate a drying out trend in kind of the Pacific Northwest?
I would. We can look at the next 15 days in terms of the anomaly, and you can see that that's what it looks like right there. So that actually takes you through June 3rd, and you can see where the stouter anomalies are right there for the next 15 days. So maybe along the coast you still get some moisture, but again, I would say it's going to be far less wet than what it has been recently.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
What else would any of you like to see, or questions you have for Brian? Sometimes
one of the more consistent positive things that I've seen in regard to the monsoon, for those that are interested, the analogs hit at a good monsoon in the Southwest. The models are hitting at a good monsoon in the Southwest. I think, it's far from a guarantee, but I really like what I'm seeing in those areas. So if you have interest in Arizona, and then across parts of the Four Corner states, Southern Nevada, maybe even Southern California, that's at least, a good bit of information right there, for sure.
Trey's he's noticing your web address there. He's just wondering if this is something fancy meteorologists have, or if this is something that the layman can access.
I'm definitely not a fancy meteorologist.
So
yeah, no, it's out there. This is a pay site, depending on what you want to pay for to get it. But I value my maps to the extreme, and Weatherbell has some pretty good stuff right there. If you want to be pointed to some other links and whatnot, I can craft an email and send out to you guys, or send out to Steve, and he can circulate it to you guys. But I would caution you, if you don't know how to read them, you can always ask me a question and I'll walk you through. And a good point of that is we're supposed to have plenty of snow in parts of Colorado this upcoming weekend. And I've got people that frequent some of these sites, and they're asking me, it's like, hey, I see there's 20 inches of snow coming to where you live. And I'm like, well, 20 inches of snow that's actually going to stick, or it's going to melt because temperatures are marginal or whatever. They just look at the map and then take it at face value. So if you walk yourself through it and you understand it, it can be very valuable. If you don't do that, it can be very misleading. So that's kind of my public service announcement on that.
Great. I had a question that if it's too involved to answer, that's fine. But you had mentioned something that I've heard before, which is if you can kind of get some soil moisture or protect your soil temperature, then it kind of almost creates its own microclimate, for lack of a better term. But how does that even work? Is it just about the temperatures?
It's not just about the temperature, but it's about if you drought is one of the worst positive feedback mechanisms in in weather and climate, because if the soil's dry, the soil heats up more that next day, which the more it heats up, the more it dries it out. The more it dries it out and heats it up, the more it mixes the atmosphere up, and you get wind. And then wind dries it out even more. Well, the more you dry it out, the hotter it gets. You see what I'm saying? It's this feedback. So, but if you, and then you don't have any moisture there to bubble up out of the ground or the vegetation to build clouds and potential thunderstorms. Conversely, if you do the exact opposite, you get the exact opposite because you have the moisture there to bubble things up. That's why in many cases, when a weather pattern gets locked in, those that are wet stay wet because of that reason. And we've seen some of that take place, as I said, along and east of I-35. In many cases, it's completely different than what's been happening farther west. Some of that has to do with the weather pattern, but the other part of it has to do is, well, if you've got soil moisture, you at least have a fighting chance. If you are void of that soil moisture, you can go from bad to worse in a very rapid fashion. And that's especially true in my backyard, but here in the Western High Plains, but it's really true everywhere. So the key is into breaking the drought initially is to getting those storms to come in there and put some moisture in the ground to slow that drought positive feedback down, or in some cases, potentially eradicate it. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, I find it interesting. One of my research projects was about regenerative practices in agriculture, and so that's one of the arguments that the regenerative guys make, is that if you can keep the ground covered and cool, that it actually may lead to not only better moisture retention in your ground, but it can actually affect a microclimate type situation.
That's right. That's why if you're in a pseudo drought and you look at a field in, say, Western Kansas that practices no-till versus a field down the road that runs a plow through it all the time, they are largely different in how the ground responds to those types of things. So it makes a huge difference. And especially if you live in an area that's very arid or pseudo desert, you need to conserve all that soil moisture you can, just to get through the year, whether you're doing forage with grass for feeding cattle, or if you're actually doing crops.
Right. Sounds like there is some interest in those links you suggested you could send out.
Good. Yeah, I'll forward. Steve, is that okay if I just forward them to you and then you can circulate them, or would that be all right? Or if you guys, kick me your email address or whatever, kick it to Ross and Ross can get it to me. Either way, but yeah, I can totally get those.
Yeah, any avenue can work for anybody that's interested. Your agent can help you out with that. I can help you out with that.
Yeah.
And mine's just ross@redsummit.com. So that
Okay.
should be easy enough to remember. And or sometimes, Brian, you'll put up a screen with your email, but I can get your email to anyone who needs it.
Oh yeah. We can, in fact, we can do that right here. Right there.
Any other questions before we let everyone get back to their evening? All right, I think we'll go ahead and shut her down. Thanks again, Brian. This is always so interesting and informative, and I think I really love this. It's kind of something that is so nice to have for our clients to just, as we talk about, weather is always on the mind of the rancher and the farmer. So
yeah, absolutely. I love the interactivity with webinars and whatnot. So, and if you guys think of questions, afterwards or whatever, as I said, just, my email's on the screen, just hit me up, or, talk to Steve or Sean or, whoever, or Ross, and they'll get the info to me, and then, we can work on it. But yeah, and as I always say, if you guys have any feedback on if you want to see something else, and just let me know. This is your material, so I want to make it as tailor-made for you as possible.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Be well.
Have a good night, everybody.